Hello, and welcome to Precision Model Railroad's YouTube channel. My name is Steven Cox. I'm the Head of Product Design at Precision Model Railroad. In today's talk, we'll be covering the following topics: the opportunities that come along with moving to smaller spaces, planning for a smaller space, people considerations, what it means to rebuild in a smaller space, and opportunities to do things better second time round. A little bit of background about me. I was born in Australia, and I started out with British and Australian freight trains in HO. And when I was quite young, only 11 or 12 years old, I sold all of my HO equipment and moved into N-scale. Kind of a bold move back in those days because things weren't very good. They ran roughly, they had motors that didn't allow the locomotives to run smoothly. Couplers were big and chunky and not prototypic at all. But I persisted with it because of the advantages that N-scale had with respect to space. In 1975, I read my first issue of Model Railroader, and that really changed things. That opened up my mind to what was available on the American side of things, and progressively that became my sole interest. Fast forward to 1989, I did my first railfan trip to the US and really came to understand what US railroading was all about and how different it was from the types of railroading activities that I saw in Australia. In 1995, I moved to Richmond, California, and from about 1999 to 2002, we made videos under the name American Railroad Media, mostly about the American Southwest. We did a lot of trips between 2005 and 2011. And then in 2011, my family moved to Toronto in Canada. And around 2020, the last of our kids moved on to university, opening up some space for a layout. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to build a layout, but in 2024, we started a new company called Precision Model Railroad, which is all about developing benchwork kits for model railroaders. So let's talk about moving and rebuilding layouts. Moving a layout or rebuilding a layout can be a traumatic experience. It means taking down what you've worked on for years and years and years. It means deciding what you need to keep. It means dismantling. And this can be a very difficult process. Taking a layout apart takes a lot of work. A lot of our layouts were never designed to be taken apart, were never designed to be broken into sections. And it can be difficult deciding what to keep. In the examples on the slide here, I had to dismantle a layout in order to make room for our new business. And I was able to recover a lot of the flex track, which ultimately was recycled into our prototype for the double helix. So that's a really important point to remember when going through that moving and dismantling process. A lot of the stuff can be reused and reused quite productively. But it is difficult, it is traumatic, and we're talking about breaking down something that you've spent years planning and building and finding materials and items for. So one thing I can definitely recommend that will make it easier is to involve other people who haven't been involved in that process. People who are very happy to help you, such as in the picture below, my wife, who is quite happy to help take down the layout. But she doesn't really have that much concern about how much time it took me to lay the track and get it to be perfect. She's just taking it apart. And so involving other people can really help move that along. You just tell them what to do, they'll happily do it. And next thing you know, you've got a pile of material, maybe some parts that you can move on to the next layout, and a bunch of stuff to be taken to the dump. Oftentimes, your rebuilt layout is better than what you've had previously. It may be smaller, but you will have the benefit of all of your experience from the past layouts, and I encourage you to rebuild if you're faced with that opportunity, but I acknowledge it can be difficult. So there are opportunities when you rebuild. What do you need to save, or what is possible to save? Some things you really like, but they just won't fit in a smaller layout. Some things are really complicated, such as the yard throat shown in the picture, but they just won't fit in a smaller layout. Doesn't mean you can't keep it. Maybe you want to just keep it as an example of your work. Smaller items like buildings and bridges, they can certainly find a home in a smaller layout. But you can't keep everything. You're going to have to let some of these things go. It's not easy, but there are opportunities to recover certain, things that you've put together previously. So It is also an opportunity to add some things. So this is an example where I've got a layout that I'm designing for a spare room. And there's an opportunity to include some features such as the coal tracks and the coal dumper in the layout that weren't in a previous iteration. So obviously you can look at the new layout as a possibility of doing some things that you weren't able to include in your prior layout. That can help make it attractive to move forward and dismantle your old layout, move forward to the new one, because it does have some new opportunities that you weren't able to pursue in the context of the old layout. Another key question is, do you stay with the same scale? And there's a lot of advantages to that. You already have rolling stock and track and buildings and so on. But particularly when you're moving to a smaller space, changing scale may be the right thing to do. And I'm certainly not going to be so bold as to say there's one ideal scale. Obviously, N scale and Z scale, for that matter, will make much better use of whatever space you have. But that isn't on its own a good reason to just drop what you've got and move to those scales. At the same time, it may even be an opportunity to move to a larger scale, such as moving from HO up to O. Perhaps if you're going from a large continuous running layout to a switching layout, O scale may work well for you. But it's the right time to be thinking about that. And it's really up to personal preferences. There are pros and cons, and it's worth making a list before you make that decision. I will say, as an N scaler, and I have been an N scaler for 50 years, there's never been a better time to be an N scale. Everything runs really, really well these days. And you'd be surprised what you can accomplish with N scale. But again, this is a personal preference, and certainly not everybody is going to end up with the same choice. So good luck. So when you are planning for a smaller space, you obviously need to consider what's going to be the operational style. How many operators will you involve? Is it going to be you, or is it you with a number of other people? How long do you want to take to build it? And how complicated will your layout be? Are you planning on building entirely from scratch? Or are you recycling some materials or modules or sections from your previous layout? What kind of benchwork do you want to use? Smaller layouts have more options in terms of benchwork. And what kind of access will you need? Typically in a spare room, a continuous run involves crossing the door. So how will you do that? Will you have a layout height that's high enough that you can just have a nod under? Or will you have some removable benchwork? Or perhaps some benchwork that slides up and down? A lot of choices to provide access. And this is particularly important if other operators will be operating. They may not be prepared to do the sorts of things that you may be prepared to do just for a layout that you operate solo. The other thing that you want to think about is smaller spaces may be the time to work with double deck layouts. And that would mean you'll need a helix, possibly two helixes. In HO scale, a typical helix is 5 to 6 feet in diameter, whereas in N scale, a typical helix is only 2 to 3 feet in diameter. So depending on your space, it may or may not be an option. But second level storage, particularly for staging, or a second level just to give you more scenic run area or more switching area, can really make fantastic use of the space. So don't rule out the possibility of including a helix in a second deck. Precision Model Railroad makes a whole line of helixes. Right now we have N scale, HO is coming soon. And it really makes that second deck possible. Our helixes are very easy to construct. We have a very wide range. You can have pretty much any radius and grade that you're looking for. And so don't dismiss that as a possibility. The second deck is very much on the table for your new layout. And that makes a lot better use of the space that you may have. When you're thinking about your new layout also, what kind of access do you want? Do you want to be able to have something running along the walls, or do you want to have something that lays out on a table, maybe accessible for all sides? Maybe the space needs to be used on a temporary basis. This is an example of a prototype that we've constructed of a folding layout that allows you to build, in this case, a 6 by 3 foot layout. And it folds up into a fairly compact design that can be stood on its end or sat on a shelf up by the ceiling, out of the way. Yet when you're using it, you unfold the layout and set up your trains, and away you go. So there are lots of options when you're moving into smaller environments just based on the type of layout structure that you end up choosing. People considerations, as I mentioned earlier, going to be a big deal for your new layout. Are you trying to bring in more people, or is it just yourself? Is it seasoned operators, or is it friends and family who've never operated before? Think about the sort of space that they will need. When you've got a narrow aisleway, it can be a little squeezy getting by, and I strongly recommend that you allow at least 3 feet. 4 feet is better, and anything less than 3 feet, it just leads to very cramped working conditions, not just for operating, but also for construction and troubleshooting. Access is a big deal. This photo shows my friend Chris Martin. We were installing some signals here, and he had to get under the layout to operate on some wires. We drew straws to see who would do this. He lost, so there he is underneath. And I don't have the knees to do this anymore. We've all got injuries from earlier in our lives, and generally speaking, we would prefer not to be getting under the layout anymore. One of the things that Precision Model Railroad will be doing in the future is offering tilt-up bench work, which would allow you to work on the underside of your layout without having to get under it. Basically, as much as possible, you want to minimize the need to go under the layout wherever you can. Now, when you're rebuilding in a smaller space, I highly encourage you to build modular. Even though you may think this is a layout that won't get moved, that often that doesn't end up being the case. And I have 2 examples here that really show what is possible when you're using kit bench work versus building your bench work in a workshop area. On the left-hand side is the workshop scenario. You need a lot of tools, you need a lot of space, and typically we tend to build big and heavy and then carry it in and install it onto the layout. But with kit bench work, it's a whole different story, and it's more like building a large model aircraft. Basically, the parts come pre-cut, they all go in designated spaces, and it's really just a matter of gluing them together. Going forward, I'm really very convinced that kit bench work is the way to go. It's very strong, it's lightweight, and it's easy to put together when you don't have a workshop. So definitely consider kit bench work as an option for building your next layout. If you have any questions, please let us know. We can be reached at info@precisionmodelrailroad.com, or you can leave comments below this video. We'd be very happy to hear from you if you have any questions about any of our products that are referenced in this talk. Let us know. They're on our website at www.precisionmodelrailroad.com, and we'd be very happy to hear from you and see if there's a way that we can help you rebuild even better in a smaller space. Thank you so much for your time.